So we're just wrapping up a meeting of NATO Defence Ministers, and during that meeting it was expected that Canada would face pressure to reverse a projected drawdown of troops which are currently deployed there to support a NATO mission in Iraq. Now, that mission was started at the behest of the Iraqi government, where they basically asked NATO to come in and provide advising and training and capacity building so that the Iraqi military and the Iraqi government could handle things with regards to extremist groups or militias backed by Iran, perhaps, or other sort of issues in enforcing sovereignty in Iraqi territory. Now, there are two sort of main streams which I think we should talk about in this video, and I want to cover them very, very briefly. The first one is NATO itself and its role in these types of missions, and the second is the history of the Middle East and Iraq and why we even have a need for such a mission in that country. Now, NATO, as you know, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was really started to counter Soviet aggression or perceived aggression during the Cold War, so that's immediately after the Second World War. Now, the organization originally started very small, mostly European countries, and expanded and is now up to about 30 countries. And so the question really remains, what is the organization's purpose? Because there is no Cold War, at the very least in the same way that there was previously. And there's no more Soviet Union to counter. There's no Warsaw Pact. There's no, threat of nuclear war at any moment in the same way that existed during the Cold War. So a lot of people have questioned the purpose of NATO. Now, Donald Trump has also criticized a number of countries and member countries of NATO for not paying their fair share. Now, there's an idea that countries pay 2% of GDP at the very least to support their militaries and therefore be able to participate in NATO. And Canada is not one of those countries that has been paying that 2%. There's been a lot of criticism of such, and it remains a question on a number of fronts. Do you believe that Canada should be a part of NATO? Where do you stand on Canada's defense spending? And there are a number of things of that nature with regards to whether or not you even think Canada should be in Iraq in the first place as part of such a mission. So that's sort of the first thing to digest. But secondly, why do we need a mission of this type in Iraq? What's been going on and what's at issue in the Middle East that causes so many problems, as we constantly read about in the news or throughout history, at the very least recent history? So I want to go back to, and if you watched my last video, you will recall an agreement that took place during the sort of end of the First World War called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And this basically divided up the remnants of the Ottoman Empire into areas of control. So there would be areas of control under the French, under the British, and a little bit under the Russians. And this ended up in what we see as the current map, where a number of countries were simply created, and these countries did not necessarily reflect who lived there, did not necessarily reflect the religious group or ethnic groups or maybe even language groups. It didn't reflect necessarily the Ottoman provinces or regions that were in that area previously and how that was administered. And so a lot of the issues internal to some of these countries, specifically with regards to ethnic groups, you may have heard of the Kurds or Sunnis and Shias, different religious or ethnic groups, different streams. These different groups may not necessarily fit so nicely into a modern nation state because they had never previously been part of the same group. And so some of that issue, it really extends from this agreement where a number of these groups were all lumped together into a new box that was then called Syria or then called Iraq. And so that is, I think, some of the issue at hand. And so overall, the two main parts. What do you think Canada should do with regards to NATO? What is our role in the Atlantic Organization? What is our role in defense? Should we increase defense spending? These are some of the questions you have to ask before you even get into whether or not Canada should be in such a mission in Iraq or in any other country where this may occur. And second, what is going on in the Middle East? And a lot of it has to do with some of these things stretching back all the way to Sykes-Picot and who lives there and who does not live there. Now, the Middle East, just as a sort of wrap up, the Middle East is a very different place than Canada. It's a very different place than the West. And I think it's very safe to say that if we're talking about, someone from out west has a very different maybe outlook or even maybe a different culture than someone who lives in Toronto or, in the Maritimes, then it's very safe to say that we in Canada have a very different culture and a very different outlook than what goes on in the Middle East. And I think that is one of the things we need to start off when we're looking at those countries, at who lives there, at the dynamics, and how we're going to get involved, and how, if we are going to get involved, what is the best way that we can do that to, have the most success possible. So, for True North, I'm Sam Eskenasi. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, there's a lot to discuss, but I hope you came away with some very interesting things to think about, and thank you so much for watching this video. Have yourselves a great day.